If you're a foreigner moving to Spain, you'll be no doubt wondering about what your tax obligations are and what the timing for those tax obligations are as well. Because not only taxation itself, but also the tax calendar and the tax forms that are required to be submitted in your new country versus your home country may differ quite greatly. So for you who's watching, who's looking to find out more about what the tax filing requirements are and the timelines for these in Spain, then this is your video. I'm going to explain it all for you. Whether you're an individual or a self-employed person, I'm going to explain to you the key forms and the key dates that you need to keep in mind. Let's get started. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I'm living and working here in Spain. I come from a finance background and I've also been registered as an autonomo in Spain. So I'm familiar with the forms, their timing, and some of the challenges that come with them as well. So let's talk by covering the Spanish tax year. So pretty straightforward. It follows the natural calendar year. So the 1st of January until the 31st of December is the time period for a Spanish tax year. Nice and straightforward. Now, of course, tax residents in Spain, those people who reside for 183 days or more within the tax year in the country, will have tax requirements and they'll be considered tax resident. But you may also have some tax requirements as a non-resident as well if you have Spanish sourced income. So as I always say in these videos, if you're unsure about your personal situation, about what the requirements are for filing your taxes in Spain, then do reach out to a professional. You can check my links in the video description as well for a few firms that you might want to reach out to. Now, in terms of the frequency and timing of filing, pretty much everyone who is tax resident in Spain will have an annual obligation. That means something that they have to submit at least once a year. And in the case of autonomos and businesses, you'll typically have quarterly obligations as well, or they may even be annual if your sales volume in the year reaches a certain threshold, which is round about the 6 million euro mark. I believe you can also submit certain forms monthly if you choose to as well, but my personal opinion is that quarterly is much easier and much less time consuming. So what I'm about to walk you through now are some of the key tax forms that people file when they're in Spain. This isn't an exhaustive list, I should say. I've just picked out some of the key forms that the majority of people, whether you're an individual person or a self-employed person, would likely submit on a yearly basis. So there may be some forms that aren't in here that you may need to submit, and at the same time, some of the forms I talk about here you may not need to submit as well. Again, consult with your accountant or your tax professional to understand what exactly are your reporting requirements from a tax perspective. So the first form that pretty much everyone who is tax resident in Spain will have to submit every year is the Form 100, the Modelo 100 as it's known in Spanish, which is the annual tax declaration, or the Declaración de la Renta in Spanish. And so this annual tax declaration basically looks at all your sources of income, whether it's from employment, whether it's from self-employment, whether it's from properties, whether it's from investing activities, interest earned, etc. And as you'll have most likely been paying tax throughout the year, and what this form essentially does is it looks at your full year revenues. It applies deductions where necessary. It considers what you've already paid in terms of tax throughout the course of the year and determines whether you owe additional money to the tax authorities in Spain or if you're owed a refund. Now, I've done a couple of videos about how this works in more detail, such as a video I did 2 years ago where I talk through the specifics of the form, and a video I put out a few weeks ago where I talk about how much you'll roughly expect to pay in tax. You can check those out at the top there. And if you are looking for an estimation of how much tax you might pay in the course of a year as well, you can also check out my Excel calculator that's downloadable from my website. There's an advanced version that looks at details such as the Beckham law, applicable deductions, autonomous community, and there's a basic one which you can download for free if you're a newsletter subscriber. So the timing of the annual tax return is that the period for filing typically starts at the beginning of April of each year, and then that runs up until the end of June, very beginning of July. So during that time, you'll get your draft, which will be available on the Agencia Tributaria website. You'll be able to look through it, correct it, modify it. Again, I suggest you go through this with a tax advisor or a tax professional, and then any money that you're owed can take a little bit longer sometimes, but if the Agencia Tributaria are late in reimbursing you, then there will be late interest applied as well. So you may even get some additional money back if it comes late. Another form due around the same time, but only affects a small percentage of the population living in Spain, is the 714 model, the Modelo 714, which is the wealth tax form, or Impuesto sobre Patrimonio. Now, this only affects a small percentage of the population because only people who have assets totaling more than 2 million euros will need to declare on this form. The wealth tax in Spain exists at the central government level and also at the autonomous community level in some regions of Spain. There are certain autonomous communities that don't apply the wealth tax and there are others that do. So I'll put the rates by autonomous community on the screen so you can get a look at what they are. But there's also a progressive scale for the central government wealth tax as well, which I'll put on the screen. But keep in mind as well that there are some exemptions to that. Like for example, your primary residence is exempt up to 300,000 euros. And if you're a non-resident, then you get an exemption up to 700,000 euros as well. I should note as well that any debts you have as well can be used to detract from your total assets, essentially giving you a net worth so that you don't pay more on your assets than you need to. Now, a third form that perhaps a lot of foreigners don't necessarily know about its existence, but applies to probably a lot of them, and it's important that they fill out, is the 720 form, the Modelo 720, which is about assets that are held outside of Spain. Now, if you have assets outside of Spain that total more than 50,000 euros in value, or in the case of bank balances or investments, etc., they have averaged a value of above 50,000 euros over the course of the previous year, then you need to declare those assets in this form to the Spanish government. So for example, if you're from the UK, you're living in Spain, and you had a property in the UK, then you would have to declare that property in the UK because more than likely it'll be over the 50,000 euro value. But what's also eligible to be declared in there is any bank accounts you have outside of Spain that have a balance, and then, you know, if your total assets goes over 50k, then you'll need to declare it within that as well. Another thing that also counts towards your foreign assets that you may not think of are the likes of De Giro, Trading 212, for example. For the Americans, maybe Robinhood. If you have stocks on these platforms, then they also count as assets held out of Spain. So again, if your investing balance is greater than 50,000 euros, or if when you sum your investing balance with any other assets and the total comes above 50,000 euros, then you need to declare that in the 720 form. The deadline for the 720 form is the end of March every year as well. So in March 2024, someone would have declared the 720 model for their assets and their average value in 2023. Again, if greater than 50,000 euros. So these are the annual declarations that probably almost everybody in the case of the annual tax declaration form has to complete, and then certain people in terms of the 720 and the 714 model will need to complete. However, if you're self-employed or business owner, then there are more forms that you need to fill out, and these will be typically on a quarterly or monthly basis. So I'll walk you through some of the key forms here. As I say, this section here is for autonomous and business owners. So the most common form for a self-employed person or business owner that they have to fill out is the 130 form, the Modelo 130, or the 131 form, Modelo 131, depending on which tax regime you're on. Now, the 130 model is done every quarter for people on the direct estimation scheme. So basically, you make your money across, every quarter, so 3 months at a time. You'll declare what your earnings are up to that point in the year, and basically the authorities will apply a 20% on that, and they'll hold that back as tax paid in advance, let's say, of the annual declaration, which will then come up next year. So whereas employees have an average percentage that their employer withholds every month based on their salary, of course, for autonomos, income comes in at different times. It can vary in terms of how much comes in. So this is kind of the tax authority's way of keeping on top of that for the self-employed people. So who needs to fill this out? So basically, if you look at your revenue for the past year, if you haven't withheld income tax on at least 70% of that income in the last year, then you'll need to fill out the 130 form. What does that mean exactly, withhold income tax on that? Well, in Spain, certain autonomos with a certain type of activity may actually have to put income tax on their invoices when they send it to a client. And so in doing so, they're actually already withholding some of that income tax that they need to pay in the future. So basically, if someone has done this already in the past year on their invoices and it covers 70% of their total revenue in the past, then they don't need to submit the 130 model. And so as I say, this is a quarterly form, and the timeline for doing it typically falls between the 20th and 22nd of the month of April, July, October, and then in the case of January, you have until the 30th typically, because January is obviously the tax year close, and then you might be getting everything kind of nice and in order for a clean tax submission. So you have a little bit more time at the end of January. The difference between the 130 and the 131 model is basically that the 130 model is a direct estimate, so it's based on your revenues, whereas the 131 model, it looks at your net result, so income minus expenses, and then it applies the withholding based on that. Okay, so the next form is the 303 form, the Modelo 303. This is basically a VAT declaration. Again, depending on your activity in Spain and depending on your income requirements as well, because this was recently changed so that people earning less than 85,000 euros from their activities don't necessarily have to apply VAT to their invoices. But again, as VAT can get very tricky, very complex, definitely worth checking with a professional to make sure that you are or aren't correctly applying VAT to your invoices. Anyways, in the case that you do, then this is basically the form every month where you submit your VAT that's been applied to your sales and revenues, and you also get to deduct the VAT on the goods and services that you've paid for as well. Now, the quarterly timelines are similar to that of the 130 model, so between the 20th and 22nd of the month for April, July, October, and again until the 30th of January. However, if you're declaring the 303 model on a monthly basis, then you have until the 30th of the month. And then one other VAT form that may apply to certain people is the 349 model, the Modelo 349, and this is basically for self-employed people and businesses that are purchasing or selling goods and services in another EU country. Because in summary, under the EU tax directive, basically whoever receives the good and service in that EU country is the one who pays the VAT. So let's say someone sells a good or service in Spain to someone based in France. The Spanish business will not put VAT on the invoice, they'll put a footnote saying reverse charge, and it's then up to the business in France to pay VAT to the French tax authorities in that case. And so this form essentially captures the movements with other EU countries in terms of VAT. And so as with the other forms, the quarterly timeline follows the 20th to the 22nd of the month, typically again April, July, October, and then a little bit more time in January. If you're doing it monthly, you have typically until the 20th of the month to declare the Intra-Community VAT transactions, as it's called. And then there's one more annual VAT form that you'll submit at the end of January each year as well, and that's the 390 model, the Modelo 390. And that's basically the annual summary of VAT. It is a compulsory declaration for anyone who charges VAT, but it is purely informative. There is no charges or anything based on this. It's essentially a summary of your total VAT that's been charged and paid throughout the year, and it's then passed on to the tax authorities. And so the deadline for that is the 30th of January each year. So guys, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. As I say, I'll leave links in the video description to 2 tax firms if you want to consult with them. I'll also leave a link to the Agencia Tributaria's official fiscal calendar, which is on their website, where you can see all of the different tax forms and the official timelines for when they're due. Leave a comment and let me know about your experience navigating all of these different tax forms in Spain. I would love to hear about it. Till next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.